So we have this short list of potential opponents for Anthony Joshua for this proposed September date at Wembley. I'm just going to give my early impressions of these potential matchups and see which one comes across as the best on paper. Of course, if a fight is made and announced, I'll follow up. I'll give some more in-depth thoughts, be able to zoom in a bit more. But for now, just going to touch on these potential fights and yeah, maybe decide which one is most preferable. But of course, this short list, on it, we have Joseph Parker, Zhang, and Daniel Dubois. I think you can't really complain too much about the level and credibility of these opponents because all three guys, without shadow of a doubt, they are on a good run of form. They are all coming off of good victories recently as well. And yeah, they've all been operating at a high level. So credibility-wise, quality, I don't think you can really argue too much. You can't complain. However, I do share the sentiment that at this point, a Joshua Parker rematch would be disappointing. I don't find that fight particularly desirable. It's not that Joseph Parker isn't a credible opponent, because he absolutely is. It's just the stylistic thought of it. The first fight between these two was boring. It wasn't entertaining at all. And I know the referee did play quite a large part in that. But I don't think, even with a good referee, I don't think a rematch would be that great, because if you look at the stages that both guys are in, they're not really the risk takers that they once were. They first fought when they were young, undefeated champions, where they probably had a bit more to prove, whereas these days, both of these guys are veterans. They are grizzled heavyweight contenders at this point. So I think it'd be a fairly cagey, careful performance from both guys. And not that Joseph Parker would be an easy fight for Joshua, but I suspect that he'd be an easier fight when compared to Dubois and Zhang. I'd see that fight going the same way as the first one, with a fairly comprehensive Joshua points win. And obviously, I don't mean any disrespect to Joseph Parker, because I've been mightily impressed with his recent form. Beat Deontay Wilder without shadow of a doubt. In my opinion, also beat Zhang without shadow of a doubt. Like, those two knockdowns aside, I don't think it was really that close. And there are some people who've run away with this idea that Zhang was robbed or it should have been a draw. No, I wholeheartedly disagree. I think Joseph Parker clearly won that fight, even with the knockdowns. And so he's captured two very good wins on the trot, in quick succession too, because fought Deontay Wilder in December 2023, fought Zhang in March of this year. He's on it. And I give him full credit, because there was a time where I was kind of washing my hands with Joseph Parker over the past couple of years, because his performances were pretty bad. They were substandard at the best of times, but also his mindset as well. It just didn't seem like he loved boxing. It seemed like he was just content to be a Tyson Fury hang-on, just constantly waxing lyrical about how great Tyson Fury is and how grateful he is for all Tyson Fury's done for him, basically living in Tyson Fury's shadow. Whereas now, Joseph Parker seems to have that fire in his belly, seems to have a bit more. His career has been rejuvenated, which is good to see, because he is a fighter with a lot of ability, but it just needs to be honed a bit more. And I think we're seeing that. I'm really impressed with the performances that Parker's putting in and the trajectory. I think he's actually getting better from a technical perspective. But entertainment-wise, yeah, neither of those Wilder or Zhang fights were entertaining, and I don't think a Joshua fight would be either. So a good high-level opponent. I like what Joseph Parker's doing, but yeah, I can't say he's on the top of my list to fight AJ. Next, we have Daniel Dubois. And Daniel Dubois, many people have spoken about him in this potential fight, potentially being the most entertaining opponent for Joshua. And I certainly see why, because Daniel Dubois isn't the most cerebral fighter. He's not the most cerebral person. And that, I think, works for him and against him. Because, yeah, he's not the most cerebral fighter, so he doesn't have the best boxing IQ. So technique, tactics, yeah, that's not his wheelhouse. However, because he doesn't think, he's willing to, as many people put it, run red lights. Daniel Dubois is a very reckless fighter, and he's a very powerful man, which, for entertainment, that is that's all you can really ask for, in a sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's always going to get the win. However, you know that Daniel Dubois, he's not really going to hold back in many senses. He's going to probably go for it. And I think that has the potential to be problematic for Anthony Joshua. Because if Anthony Joshua can't hurt Dubois, if he can't keep him honest at least, then he could be in for a rough night, because I'm certain that Daniel Dubois has more than enough power, not only to hurt Joshua, but to knock him clean out. And that, not to make out that Daniel Dubois is the best in the division, because he's not. He has some severe limitations, but he has a lot of brute strength and a lot of physicality. More than enough to hold his own against most fighters, I think. And so that's intriguing, because Daniel Dubois, he's going to come with the intention of bringing it and taking a fight to Anthony Joshua. But there's going to be the question mark of, can Daniel Dubois take his power, or can't he? And sometimes those are the only questions you really need for a fight to be entertaining. I suspect that, I'm almost certain that Joshua will be able to land on Daniel Dubois. I don't think that's a matter of if, I think that's when. If you look at Dubois' shockingly bad defense in the Hrgović fight, it really was awful, particularly for those first 2 rounds. And Hrgović, he's a good, solid fighter. He's got a good schooling, so there's not very much tell on his punches. He throws his punches quite cleanly and correctly, particularly the straight shots. But he's nowhere near as dynamic as Anthony Joshua, and I don't think he hits anywhere near as hard. So Joshua's going to be coming, I feel, with better skill, just as good punch quality, maybe even better with certain shots, and more power, as well as being a better athlete overall. So he's going to be landing on Daniel Dubois. But can Daniel Dubois take the power? I think he might be able to take it fairly well for a couple of rounds, but I don't think he'll want to bank on his chin. I think that'd be very unwise. Because we have seen Daniel Dubois hurt before. Just because Hrgović didn't fight him, it doesn't mean all of a sudden Daniel Dubois has this toughness. He was hurt by Usyk. He was hurt by Kevin Lerena. He was hurt by, what's his name, Richard Lartey. Clearly hurt by all 3 of these guys. And I don't think any of them punch as hard as AJ. So I'd give Daniel Dubois a good shot. I wouldn't have him as a favourite, but I think he'd be a live dog in that fight. Although I'd be favouring AJ to win probably 60-40, maybe 65-35, something like that. But I could definitely see it being a very entertaining fight, because Daniel Dubois, he's not really one to be too cautious. But then we have Zhang. Now this one, I'm not sure about this one, because I like the idea of the matchup, because both guys, very dynamic, very hard punchers. I've spoken about before how I really like Zhang's style, the craft behind it, as well as the punching power. I find him very entertaining. But I just think the nature of both of these guys, Zhang and Joshua, they both prefer to counterpunch. And I think they're going to be well aware of the kind of power that the other guy is bringing. And so I think this also could be a quiet fight, where both guys are maybe cancelling each other out a little bit, because neither one of them wants to commit too much. So I think that would be a fight that's relatively quiet, fairly cagey, but with a high potential, a high likelihood of a very dramatic finish or very dramatic moments. I think I'd be very surprised if that fight went to points. Yeah, definitely. I think Zhang is the bigger puncher, and I think Zhang, his skill set, as I've spoken about before, is very focused, that front foot counter punching. Whereas with AJ, he's kind of diversified his boxing repertoire a bit. That's what he's tried to do over the recent years. And so I'd see it as, AJ, the boxer puncher, versus, the very hard hitting front foot counter puncher. I'm just not sure how entertaining it would be. But I'm kind of also factoring in, or trying to factor in, the impression that the wider boxing public would have. More so, not for our benefit, but more so to kind of see it from Joshua, his perspective and his teams, because I think a lot of it will come down to who they want, who they pick. And I'm just wondering, do they maybe see Dubois as higher risk, low reward? Because, even though Dubois is, IBF interim champion, would Joshua, or do his team see him as, okay, say Joshua beats Dubois, is he going to get the credit? Because even though Dubois beat Hrgović, not many people are bigging him up that much. Whereas if you look at people's attitude towards Zhang, a lot of people are saying like Zhang's the man right now. Like he's the guy to beat, obviously other than Usyk. And so even though Zhang's not coming with any kind of trinket or mandatory position, would it be good for his reputation, in the eyes of the fans? As I say, like this doesn't really play much of a role in terms of like which fight I'd rather see, but I'm just trying to, I guess, play devil's advocate and maybe predict who the most likely opponent is. But also as well, I think if you factor in Joshua's recent performances, of course, he fought Usyk twice, 2021 and 2022 respectively. Had a couple of easier fights against Franklin and Helenius, and then fought Otto Wallin in December. He's had a lot of experience against southpaws. Do you think Joshua would maybe want to keep that momentum going? Where he's had quite a few training camps with southpaw sparring. I wonder if he'd want to strike while the iron's hot and while it's fresh in his mind. I don't know. I'm spitballing, but two very good fights on the table, I think, in Dubois and Zhang. I'd see him as about equal, to be fair. I'd give Zhang a better chance, I think, whereas I see Joshua as like a 60-40 or 65-35 in Joshua's favour. I'd probably see Zhang versus Joshua as a 50-50. I'd see that as a much more dangerous fight for Joshua. Probably because there are less question marks surrounding Zhang. I feel like we have a good idea, a good gauge of what he can do, whereas with Daniel Dubois, he's still rebuilding a little bit. And good wins against Miller and Hrgović, although still some very clear, glaring weaknesses, which is he going to be able to rectify, or can Joshua capitalise on them? I'm not sure. But nevertheless, interesting times ahead. We'll just have to keep an eye out to see which fight gets announced. But for now, I pose the question to you guys. What do you think of these three potential fights? How do you think they'd go in terms of how you think it'll unfold, what you think the result would be? But also, are there any other names you'd like to see Joshua in against for this September date? Leave it down below and I'll get back to you. But for now, thanks for listening and I'll catch you on the next video.